So ahoy, everybody. Ahoy. Oh, it's going to be great already. It's all about the ahoy at the beginning. So I'm Geeg Wiles, and I'm the caretaker, keeper of chronicles, and voice for Captain Ahab here. As you can see, he's a 3-foot-tall, 40-pound, bright yellow wooden fisherman. But what you may not know is he's a wannabe pirate captain, hence that Jolly Roger behind us. So we're here today to share our story with you, but more importantly, to show you through our story the importance of seeking out other stories from strangers that you may glance at and then soon forget about in your day-to-day. And although I've traveled with Captain Ahab for the last 15 years, I know his tale for the last 74. And that's because before I became his caretaker, he was in the possession of my grandfather. There we go. And on July 18th, 1943, my grandfather, up in the upper right-hand corner there, he was, July 18th, 1943, he was awaiting the next morning where he was about to go on tour in World War II. And obviously they were out celebrating at a local pub because that's what you sort of do. And by celebrate, I mean trying to drink your nerves away, because that tension building about getting on a ship and going far away from home is something that happens on every tour. So all of the officers that were ranked above them saw this tension rising and decided to tell them a story. And it was more about a prank that had been going on in the Navy for who knows how long. And the prank was about commandeering something from that port town and making it a stowaway on the ship. And the whole idea was to build a scrapbook of your tour, or the Lawn Gnomes travels that you would take as you were on that tour. So you would write letters, plaster it with cargo stickers or stamps, and maybe take a few pictures if you could. And the whole idea was to return safely home to that port and return the lawn gnome and the scrapbook to the lawn that they found him on. And that way, the once very sad parents would be very happy when they knocked on the door, hid in the bushes, and saw the said parents looking through the scrapbook and realizing what had actually happened. It wasn't just that somebody commandeered a lawn gnome of theirs. It was, he sort of went on a little vacation in a way. So my grandfather and his war buddies there, who became my uncles later on, got super excited about the task, forgot about their anxieties about the next day, and the next morning, Captain Ahab here woke up on the LST-84, which was a tank landing craft. And for over the next year, that scrapbook was made. And before you knew it, those men were all safely home in port and celebrating on that dock that they just got back from. And as they were excitingly celebrating that they'd completed this scrapbook and were about to bring them back, as they were talking amongst themselves around the circle, they realized that they did every detail of the task at hand perfectly, and the thing they didn't do was remember the most important detail, where that lawn was that they took him from. And for the life of me, I can't remember why they couldn't remember where they got him from. But regardless, they didn't let the task at hand, or the mistake at hand, ruin the task at hand. So they decided to keep Captain Ahab and bring him home with them. And as time went on, they all decided to buy some property in the Catskills of New York. And it was a 350-something acre farmland with a big farmhouse and barn and orchards and fields and everything you would picture in the Catskills for that size of a property. And every year on July 18th, they get back together and throw a reunion, a little hootenanny. And as they got older, they got married, had kids, and those kids had kids. And out of the 34 of us, one of us happened to be born in July and just happened to be born on the 18th. So for the first 10 years of my life, I thought this was my birthday party. But really, I found out at 10 years old, it was all about this statue here. And I found this out on the night of my 10th birthday because I woke up to a ruckus coming from that barn. And since it was my birthday and I was 10 years old, I had this idea of grandeur about I should be allowed into this barn. And the barn, everybody in the family knew, was my grandparents and his war buddies there, my uncles. It was their man cave. And so their wives loved it when they went out there because usually they disappeared for a long period of time. Their kids, who were about 30-something at the time, had never set foot in there, and they gave up at this point. And then all the grandkids, who were around 10 years old, we were told there was bear traps and pitfalls and every other thing you can imagine. So we never set foot next to it. But like I said, they woke me up from afar, and I decided I'm brave enough at 10 years old to go out there and demand entrance on my birthday. So I got up out of bed and, half asleep, followed my hand down the wall until we got to the staircase. When I got to the staircase, I started going down, and my body decided there would be a more efficient way to go down as I tumbled down this very long staircase. And I basically got up from the floor in a puddle, wondering why somebody would have spilt something and not cleaned it up on the stairs, especially during the evening. So anyways, not deterring me, I got up, walked through the screen door, out down the porch, went through the grass field that was 50 yards long to the barn. And when I, excuse me, when I got to the barn, it's a big classic red barn, white trim, huge barn doors like you can picture. And there's a little human-sized door cut out in one of those doors. And it had a little slot and a one bulbed iron lamp that was above the door frame. And I marched right up to the door, and I knocked, and then I heard another knock. I'm just kidding, it wasn't like that, but I thought I'd try that one out today. And I banged on the door a couple times, the light came on, the slot opened, and one of my uncles, my grandfather's naval comrades, yelled, "What's the password?" And I froze. Not only because I didn't know the password and didn't really plan this outing that I was on, but because when he turned on the light, I noticed that my hands were all red because I busted open my chin pretty bad on the way down the stairs. So instantly I heard all the bolts and locks on the door coming undone, and the door swung open, and one of my uncles put me under his arm and dragged me inside. So obviously my well thought out plan worked. And when I got carried inside, they put me at the card table that was in the center of the room, and I was like a kid in a candy store. I was looking around, and there was a pool table and card tables and everything else you can imagine for the man cave that it was. One of the walls was covered in antlers and trophies and guns because they were avid hunters back in the day. Another wall had Ahab here, and there was handprints and signatures and all kinds of knickknacks from what looked like all kinds of stories that they were about to tell me. The third wall was the barn doors, and I'd never seen them open because they were welded shut basically with all the old farm equipment. It was just piled against the door in a fashion that looked artsy, but really it was just so they would never open. And then the last wall was the fun wall with the bar top and the kegerator and the gun cabinet and all those other adult toys that they had. And that's when I noticed everybody sort of running around frantically when I got to that wall with my eyes, because the doc of that group was in the gun cabinet pulling out a big green case with a plus sign on it, white plus sign. And as he was doing that, there was a whiskey bottle being thrown around the room, and my grandfather knelt down next to me as he got it and took a swig and told me that they were quite inebriated, so we weren't going to take a ride to the hospital. But they were also not inebriated enough to be brave enough to go wake up their wives or daughters and tell them that I had to go to the hospital because they would have got blamed for something they had no part in. So they told me they were going to stitch me up right there. And as my grandfather said that, he was dumping the whiskey on his hands, and he slapped me in the face. And that's when I woke up from this daydream I was having. Anyways, 8 stitches later, I was in a pair of bloody Spider-Man pajamas sitting at that card table. And that's when I found out what this whole celebration, this annual celebration, was all about. So this card game that they played, they would all throw in about $1,000 and have a suitcase packed by the door. And whoever won the game that night didn't win the money, but they won the destination. And they would leave right after that game the next morning and take Ahab on yet another adventure. And that scrapbook that they built in the 40s was now that barn wall, and it covered a huge span of it. So for the next 9 years, I would count down the days to my birthday and set an alarm for late in the night and go to bed early, because the deal was, if I said they drove me to the hospital and everything was fine, I would get invited back to the game every year. And at this game, even at 10 years old and as the years followed, but I'd noticed the camaraderie they had. And some of you in this room may know it's hard enough to keep one friend for over 50 years, never mind a handful. So just the fact that this statue did that for them for one way or another was really intriguing to me. So of course I wanted to be a part of this special tradition. And that 9 years flew by, and before you knew it, it was my 19th birthday. And the next morning when I woke up, I went out to the barn to clean up after them, because usually they'd leave and it was just sweeping dust on the floor, but I got to sort of reenact the night in my head. And they were all still there when I walked in that morning. And before I could figure out what was going on, my grandfather handed me an envelope and told me, since Ahab and I share such a special date together, that it's only fitting that we share in all the adventures to follow it. So to take the winnings from last night's game, wake up my friends, put Ahab here in the car, and just start driving. And I've done that for 15 years now. But before we get into all those adventures, right after that short road trip we took that was unplanned, we were back at university, and Ahab was my dorm room doorstop. And we decided to evolve his task, and after a few weeks of people seeing him, because we had the end dorm room, the students let curiosity get the better of themselves and asked what was up with the gnome holding open my door. And I would trade them a picture, or I would take a picture of them and trade for a much longer version of that story. And as you can see, there's a ton of pictures here of people. The word started to spread around campus. People started celebrating birthdays, and the mural started to grow. And before you knew it, he got involved in some social activities, and he became the official mascot of the University of New England, as you can see, and more the unofficial social mascot there. But before you knew it, it was our senior year, and that mural, was floor to ceiling, wall to wall, and all the people we had met and adventures we had taken. And that's when I realized that the task that I took on as being Ahab's caretaker had evolved yet again into showing people that if this 3-foot-tall, 40-pound, bright yellow wooden fisherman who wants to be a pirate captain can do all these things and meet all these people, then really nobody has a good enough excuse not to do these exact same things themselves. Some of those things over the last 15 years have been like seeing roadside attractions like the world's largest ball of twine. We got locked up on Alcatraz for a weekend, and the town of San Francisco said we didn't pay our parking tickets and locked them up, and it was a fun conversation to have in that very quiet place. We've participated in the Red Bull Flute Togger, got invited to it. It's a competition where you engineer a flying craft, and it gets launched 30 feet off that ramp, and you see how far you can go. And as you can see, we built a pirate ship. So we didn't win by any means, but we didn't come in last place either, so it was a lot of fun. Excuse me. We get to meet all kinds of people every year, thousands of people. And my most exciting story about meeting people, even though I meet thousands and I actually remember most of them, was with Mark Hamill here, Luke Skywalker. We were at the New York Comic-Con, and he held up his autograph line for 12 minutes to hear the story while everybody else behind us was frantically ready to attack us, basically. But Mark here was awesome, and he signed Ahab, and it's all part of the story now. He's also flown first class. We told the story at the airport, and they upgraded his ticket and not mine. So every time I talk about this, I am very bitter that I've never flown first class, and he has. We've done some other things like kiss the Blarney Stone in Ireland, which was a lot of fun. We have matching tattoos, as you can see. There's a graphic novel that started last July. Every year we try to do something special on the anniversary, so we started a comic this year, and it'll end on July 18th this coming year in a couple months, and it'll be a full year of our college years and how we remember them very differently than the security and everybody else at the school did. We run in all kinds of races, which means I have a 44-pound handicap in most of the things that I do, but like I said, we usually don't come in last place, which is exciting. We've also been invited to be in all kinds of weddings and ceremonies, and Ahab always causes trouble, as you can see. Not this previous winter, but the winter before that, we decided to trek into Patagonia in Chile, and we literally trekked. We hitchhiked all the way through Patagonia, all the way until we got to the Lagoon of the Gnomes, which is just one of their many national parks down there in Patagonia. And if that wasn't extreme enough for you, he's done all kinds of stuff especially at conventions and things, like we've been invited to talk at TED. Since November, the Masons have had us doing a circuit all over the state and even outside of the state at this point. And this actual convention right here sort of rounds out the whole last 6 months of what we've been doing, and I'll talk about it at the end. But also, one of the most exciting places that I've gotten to speak at was in Mammoth Cave, 500 feet underground, with that one little wicker oil lamp there. And I got to tell the story just in complete silence with another 50 people standing around that makeshift campfire with the lantern. There's other things, though, much more adrenaline-filled things like ziplining over canyons, jumping out of perfectly good airplanes, whitewater rafting, and even being part of national monuments. But in that whole time, I counted down the days to my 20th birthday because I would finally get to be part of those stories and that banter that they had. I would have stories from traveling with Captain Ahab. But unfortunately, none of those men made it to my 20th birthday. So in their absence, I felt compelled to rebuild that family that they built out of strangers and fill those chairs around the card table and continue these adventures as my adventure goes on. And all you have to do to be part of this crew of Captain Ahab's is to sit and listen to the lessons that I've learned through trial and error since those men passed on how to carry around a lawn gnome. And believe it or not, there's a lot of lessons. The first one is the importance of an icebreaker. Whether it's the color of your hair, or a pet you may walk, or even just something you wear, it's the thing that starts a conversation or lets you start a conversation with someone else. Like, oh, hey, I love your shirt or your hat or your smile. Anything you can use as an excuse, because those conversations turn into bigger ones. And as you can see, Ahab is the best icebreaker I've ever seen. He reaches every demographic, and no matter what geographic location we're in, you can just see that there's just so many groups of people that find an excuse to talk to us. A couple more. This is one of my favorite stories, actually. This guy right here, I guess his girlfriend bought him one of the Jolly Roger classic t-shirts here. And I didn't know him at the time. She bought it years before. And he came running up to me, ripping off his coat, saying, I have some of your clothing. And I didn't know what was going on, but after he sort of calmed down and got his breath, he explained to me that his girlfriend actually bought it when she met us years back and everything. And now John and I are quite close, and we stay in touch. But it was an interesting way to introduce yourself. I wouldn't call it an icebreaker, but it was very interesting. The next thing I learned is how to ask for things, whether it's asking myself or others for help to get these tasks done. And when we went to kiss the Blarney Stone in Ireland, we realized that it was just me working my butt off every summer, saving up all that money, and then spending it on taking the statue around the world. So instead, we had to think of creative ways to fund this. So we started crowdsourcing a lot of our ideas, where we brought back that old scrapbook idea that Ahab first started with that prank. But instead, as you can see, that couple right there is a cardboard cutout on a popsicle stick. And as you can see through the next couple photos, that these people gave us a tiny bit of funding, and I ended up bringing a dozen people with us in a way and making them scrapbooks. So when they went to Ireland, they would recreate these photos eventually. And that's how we traveled for a couple of years. The next lesson was the importance of making a bucket list, or just a to-do list. So Ahab's bucket list on the site is hundreds of items long, and it's all from people telling us, oh, I've always wanted to do that, or hey, have you tried this? Or a lot of times when we talk at universities or high schools or other places, we'll make bucket lists with the students and we'll incorporate them into the list. And if you keep a list at home, even if it's just a daily list, it's like doing the dishes. When you cross it off, even if it's something as tedious as that or a big trip you want to take, when you start crossing those things off your bucket list, the next one just comes faster and faster, because that little bit of rush, that motivation you get from completing even the simplest tasks, makes the next one easier and easier. And like I said, we do these bucket lists with a lot of students a lot of the time. And my favorite example is when we were in Veers. It's a resource station in the Virgin Islands. And a lot of students do research projects there for spring break instead of going on a classic spring break. And on this island, people would see Ahab and the students would ask us to do a presentation. And it was a lot of fun because we didn't have all the equipment, but it was just fun to do it in that sort of out in the middle of nowhere way. And as we made bucket lists with groups of students that were there together, they were writing dozens of things down, except for one girl. She wrote down swim, as you can see on this little piece of paper with colored pencils that we were using, because that's all we had. And some of you in this room know me pretty well at this point, and I put my foot in my mouth pretty easily all the time. And instantly when I was reading these, I said, oh, swim? That beach right there is 30 seconds away. Let's just go jump in and you're all set, And she was like, Geeg, you don't understand. I don't know how to swim. And at 20 years old, she'd never really said it out loud, and that's why she hadn't done it. And at breakfast the next morning, they all started walking back. I could see them walking back from the beach because that night, instead of me taking a step back at that point, almost calling her out, not on purpose, everybody else took a step forward, and they devised a plan, and they were walking to breakfast all red as lobsters because they spent the whole morning teaching her how to swim, and she had a grin from ear to ear on her face. So one of my favorite ones, and I say this about every lesson that I've learned, but is about making excuses. So this is everywhere Ahab and I have been just in our nation in the last 15 years. And all of those things happen because my grandfather and his war comrades there, my uncles, decided to make Captain Ahab his own excuse to get off that lawn and start doing these things. Because his map probably, or most definitely, would have looked like this if they hadn't, right? And honestly, if he sat on that lawn for 74 years, he probably would have dry rotted or got thrown in a fire pit by now. Yeah. But luckily, they commandeered him, and his map looks like that now. And when I think about it, Ahab was definitely their excuse to do all the things they did. I know for a fact they would have not gotten together every year or as frequently or gone on all those trips together if Ahab wasn't in the picture. And the last lesson I can convey to you guys is to play to your passions. So my grandfather right there, up in the corner, said I inherited his pirate smirk he's got there, his passion for piracy. But he knew he missed the golden age of piracy by 300 years. So when he was drafted into the military back in World War II, he chose the Navy because he knew that was the closest thing to a modern-day pirate he would be able to be. So growing up, him and my uncles there brainwashed me into thinking piracy was also not only a profession, but a profitable profession. And as I got older, I realized that it wasn't a profession, but I could go to school for marine biology and have the same mindset. Even though I missed the golden age of piracy by 350 years, I could be out in the water doing the things that I liked doing or acting like. And I filled my summers with jobs like at summer camps teaching sailing or whitewater raft guiding, where it was socially acceptable to dress and talk the way I like to. But the best way I get to be a modern-day pirate is through Ahab's Adventures, the company that we've created to show people how to commandeer their own lives. So one of the coolest things about this adventure that we're on is that family that was built out of strangers by those men as they grew older. Every single one of them followed this story for the last 3/4 of a decade, as some of them have outlived some of the other ones, as you can see. You can just click through a bunch of these. And as you notice, these ladies have been a part of my life for a long time, but I know for a fact that they don't understand a thing I'm doing with Ahab at this point, because I've evolved this prank into a much bigger story. So looking forward, the only thing, as I looked back, that I realized is that those men didn't take pictures of Ahab and I on that special day when I was growing up. So looking forward for whoever the next caretaker might be, I'm hoping it's a son or daughter of a friend of mine or a niece or a nephew. So every year on everybody's birthdays and that next generation, I've been taking pictures of my nephew. Owen here is the example. And as you can see, as he gets older, he gets more comfortable and curious with Captain Ahab here. And he gets very comfortable with him. It's pretty amusing. But as you can see, I've also realized that I realize how much fun it is to brainwash a child into thinking piracy is a legitimate thing, as you can see. And he mimics what I do. It's just so he dresses like a pirate. He wears the same things that I do. And it's just very exciting to see what I must have acted like growing up and what he or any of the other nieces and nephews that I have, one of them might grow up and have an even bigger foundation of the story to tell after me. But you don't have to be obviously blood related to me to be part of our family or the pirate crew here, because everybody that hears this story and wants to be involved can be as involved on any level that they want to be. And whether the last 25 minutes or so has made you more curious than confused, or honestly more confused than curious, all you have to remember from all this is that in your day-to-day, when you're walking on the street or wherever you might be, when you see that stranger walking by you, find that icebreaker about them and use it to start a small conversation. Because those small conversations always turn into bigger ones. Those friendships always grow into closer ones. And before you know it, who knows what kind of trouble you can get into with those newly made friends. Because when you think about it, it was a story from a stranger that started this whole journey for us. So why not let our story be the start of yours? Cheers. So you guys got to see a couple dozen photos there. On Ahab's website, as you can see, there are 7,500 photos of all the places that we've been together over the last 15 years. So whether you just saw this or want to really get lost in the adventures we have, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll be here all day and share some stories with us. And like I said earlier, this is just about, I'm sure it's not the last stop on the Masonry tour that I'm sort of on, but the last 6 months of seeing so many districts and lodges and everything else, the photos from today will be the last ones before I compile an album that's been 6 months in the making, and there's hundreds of photos already. So if you want to be a part of it, whether on whatever level of Masonry you're involved in, whether you just know somebody or you've been a Mason for 50 years or 5 months, feel free to take pictures and share some stories with me, because I'd love to hear them. Again, cheers.